Welcome to This Explainer. We're going to dive right into decoding the so-called magic of great teaching and actually translate it into measurable science. We often think of amazing teachers as having some sort of mystical, unexplainable gift. But before we look at the scientific blueprint behind what they do, let's start with something a little more personal. Think about the absolute best teacher you've ever had. We all have that one person who just totally changed our trajectory, right? Now ask yourself, was their impact really just an innate magical gift they were born with? Or was it actually a highly specific, measurable mix of behaviors, emotional intelligence, and ethical traits? Okay, so here's the game plan for today. We're looking at 5 key areas: the anatomy of teaching, measuring the teaching spark, the power of emotion, the educator's ethical compass, and finally, getting from memory to reflection. Let's get right to it. Starting off with Section 1, the anatomy of teaching, and how we actually define true education. So to really understand what a master educator is, we've got to set some boundaries around the concept. Take basic conditioning, for example. It's really just modifying habits. You do a trick, you get a treat. It's a very narrow scope. True teaching, though, it's a whole different ballgame. It actually shatters that narrow scope, developing the intellect and lifting the learner way beyond just repeating habits. And that naturally brings us to the stark difference between teaching and indoctrination. Indoctrination basically locks the mind. It forces a single, rigid belief on you with zero freedom. A master educator does the exact opposite. They unlock the padlock, offering democratic freedom and showing you that there are multiple solutions to a single problem. Moving on to Section 2, measuring the teaching spark, specifically looking at the mind and aptitude. Now that we've nailed down what teaching actually is and what it isn't, what exactly is teaching aptitude? Well, as we see here, it's definitely not just knowing the facts. I mean, you could be an absolute genius in your field and still be a terrible teacher. Instead, teaching aptitude is more of a specific mindset toward educating others. It encompasses your instructional planning, your creativity, and honestly, that absolutely vital ability to take super confusing concepts and explain them simply, which is something we've all wished for in a tough class. In the real world, these traits show up in some highly specific ways. An effective teacher communicates with crystal clarity. They're super organized, and they are deeply fair. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that a teacher with high aptitude treats their students like teammates. They keep you actively thinking and building the puzzle together, instead of just letting you sit there passively listening. All right, on to Section 3, the power of emotion, or what we're calling the heart of the classroom. Here's where things get really fascinating. Cognitive intelligence and meticulous lesson planning, they are completely insufficient on their own to make a great teacher. Raw intellect just isn't enough. Look at this towering 9.0 impact score for emotional intelligence. It literally outranks pure teaching aptitude and time management. This proves that a teacher's ability to regulate their own emotions, cope with the stress of the job, and show genuine empathy is the single biggest predictor of student success. Incredible, right? To put that into perspective, the data shows that emotional intelligence and teaching aptitude together explain a whopping 58% of the variance in academic scores among teacher trainees. Think about that for a second. More than half of what makes a successful future educator comes down to this specific combo: the mind's aptitude and the heart's emotional regulation. Which brings us to Section 4, the educator's ethical compass. Literally, the soul of teaching. So we've got the mind and we've got the heart, but beyond both of those is the soul of our master educator, rooted entirely in professional ethics. A massive 86% of surveyed teachers see the profound value of ethics in teaching. They know they're the moral compass for the next generation, and they know that just one unfair action can ruin a student's trust forever. But here's the catch. Despite that incredibly high awareness of how crucial ethics are, only 52% of educators have actually received formal training or gone to workshops about it. That is barely over half. And as you might guess, this stark training gap leads right to the issue we see in this quote. Because a lot of institutions don't mandate ethical training, newer teachers are literally left to rely on just their gut feeling when navigating some incredibly complex real-world dilemmas. We're talking tough situations, grading biases, intense institutional pressures, or figuring out how to properly handle student confidentiality. Okay, our final section, number 5, from memory to reflection, looking at the actual execution of master teaching. Let's bring the mind, heart, and soul all together. How does this actually play out in a classroom? Well, a master educator guides students on a deliberate climb. You start at the base level, memory, then you hike up through understanding, where concepts actually start making sense, and ultimately you summit at the reflective level, which is the absolute peak of independent insight. Looking a bit closer at that foundation, the memory level focuses purely on the retention and reproduction of factual textbook knowledge. It's considered the least thoughtful stage, mainly because students aren't necessarily grasping how to apply what they're learning in the real world. Now, don't get me wrong, memory level teaching is a totally necessary prerequisite. You gotta know the rules before you can break them. But it's still the lowest tier, where the learner's reasoning powers are barely involved. But contrast that baseline with the summit, the reflective level. This is a highly thoughtful, laissez-faire approach that leads to deep, original insight. What's absolutely fascinating here is that it demands equal, active involvement from both the teacher and the students. It takes a teacher with immense emotional intelligence, incredibly high aptitude, and unshakable ethics to guide a room to this reflective peak. When they do, that is where true, independent student insight finally happens. So, what does this all mean for us? As we consider the profound science behind the mind, heart, and soul of a great teacher, we are left with this critical question. Are we training actual educators, or are we just creating information delivery systems? If we really want our students to reach that incredible reflective level of thought, we absolutely have to prioritize emotional intelligence, ethical training, and genuine teaching aptitude in our educational frameworks. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it leaves you thinking deeply about the science behind the educators who shaped your own world.